So the subject of the day is supposed to be controlling the opponent's blade. Now there's all kinds of ways and reasons, but if you don't control your opponent's blade, and we're talking epee, they can shut their eyes and stick blindly and hit you and it'll count. And sometimes I think they do. So what the whole idea of controlling the blade is that your opponent doesn't get to hit you at all. For long enough, at any rate. So the game in epee is not to hit fast necessarily, but to hit first. And the machine tells you which one was first. Now, if your opponent doesn't hit you at all, and sooner or later somehow you hit the opponent, he hits 0, you have 1, you were first. You can be first by simply preventing the opponent from hitting you at all for a duration of time. It's not an eternal thing. And so that's why it has to be integrated into your strategy and your tactics, that you can control your opponent's blade. Not always, but there are times when it's necessary to be safe. You're in a bout and you're down 4-3. You want to allow your opponent to hit you and maybe make a double? Not useful. So strategically, you have to be able to delay your opponent's ability to hit you long enough for you to score your touch. Controlling your opponent's blade creates delay in the opponent, more than it should of yourself. Now, you have that video of that Ben Weider lesson. You have that. If it's possible to show that tomorrow, would that be possible?
I think so.
Okay, because that's an absolute fantastic presentation of how to control your opponent's blade and how to hit, and no matter what he's doing, you find it again and hit him again anyway. That's what that lesson is. And he's not a very tall guy, and a very excellent epee fencer. And not being so big, he had to control the blade, or people would go like this and he wouldn't hit. But he outlived that and died pretty damn good. So the video will show you that. So there are all kinds of ways of controlling your opponent's blade. Meaning there's contact with your blade. Going like this with your back arm gets you a card, but it doesn't get you any touches because you get ejected from doing that often enough. It works though. If you're in a real duel and there's a blade coming at you and you went like that, you're the winner. In the bout, you get a red card. Do it again and you have problems. It's cheating, but if the other guy's got a sharp one, suffer the embarrassment of being called a cheat. Meanwhile, you ain't dead. So let's talk about different ways, and there are different languages and there are different concepts about this thing. But what's the simplest way of controlling the opponent's blade while you find time to hit? Beat the blade. Does that control the blade, or does it just deflect the blade?
That's the foil talking.
Well, you certainly do have right of way in epee, but it doesn't get written on the score sheet unless you also hit first.
Bind blade?
Yeah, okay. Well, bind is a category, and there's a bunch of them. But yeah, okay.
Prise de fer, is that what you mean?
But yeah, the prise de fer is a category of actions that comes from the French school with that terminology. And I thought it just meant press the blade. The basic action I have taken to starting epee lessons with is a direct thrust which is preempted by the opponent, and that's a direct opposition. And you get the feel of that. And then we build actions from that, and that'll be demonstrable later. Another action, the engagement and release in an opposition. Don't go away. Just, okay? You catch the blade, you trap it, and then you continue the action in opposition. Circle opposition, basics, that's letter D on the ABCs. Circle opposition in epee. Leverage is, I said yesterday, and everybody seemed to agree, that much of fencing is at the level of junior high school physics. And if you can recall any physics you learned in junior high school, you probably never realized that was, yeah, That was my best year ever in physics. The idea is it's not complex. It can be made complex, and there can be exchanges of actions which make the froth very interesting and very colorful, but if it takes you that long to do something that hits the other guy, you probably got hit anyway. You do things efficiently, economically, and with full control so the opponent doesn't get a chance to hit you. So if I take the blade, say I have him do a circle 6 and I engage the blade, and then keeping the blade, I go around the blade to back to the 6 again. There's a term for that action. Envelopment, yes. You take the blade and you keep the blade, and if the person tries to lean on it and push their way through it, they wind up trapping themselves worse. That's the whole idea. If you do an engagement and you get a press back, then you can change, and as they go past your blade, you just get them on the other side. And it's like you took that in the first place. That's an engagement with pressure. Get another engagement with pressure. What's another thing? The person has taken your blade and you want to block them from being able to score. What do? You fight hard to overpower that person, or yield. And some people, you tell them to yield, they say never. That was a Marty Davis line. We were coming onto a highway entrance, and he's driving his Porsche, and I said, Marty, yield. The sign said, he says, never. Those of you who remember Marty Davis would understand. Unfortunately, we've lost him, but what a dear friend he was, and what a great fencer he was. And he never knew he was a great fencer. He just thought he was a very competitive fencer. He was great. Anyway, but that's yield. The yield in fencing is a combination action of blocking the opponent and taking advantage of the fact that they were trying to do something you didn't let them do. One of the favorites of mine is if somebody wants to take the blade here and he's going to carry it around down to here, and I give him more blade than he can swallow, and he winds up wanging into my guard, and they go. I'm fencing for a gold medal in the Maccabea Games, and I'm up against this Italian fencer, and he was pretty much right out of the book. Maestro Cesar had taught me, gauge the 6, and then if you get a little back pressure, circle engage in 4. And then carry it all the way around to envelop it in 4. And by this time, the guy's going, and just reach out and hit him. That would have been what I intended to do. Well, what he did to me instead was I took the blade and I went around to do the cart envelopment, and he yielded to it, clank, and he started to come off the blade. So I made counter yield. He landed on my 4 going clank, and he was quite surprised that he hadn't hit anything. And by that time, his weapon was not in front of his body anymore, and I launched the longest lunge of the whole tournament. So it was an engagement, an envelopment, a yield, a counter yield, and then finally an opposition straight lunge. But it took about 2.5 seconds for the whole deal. But because the reward at the end of that lunge was the gold medal, I remember every detail of every part of that action as though it were happening today. Now, is it good to have trained to do that stuff? To engage, envelop, yield, counter yield, transport the blade, all kinds of ways of doing that where the opponent seems to think he has you and suddenly he has himself. The best thing about yielding is you don't fight. You control. Because if you fight, you're liable to slip into his strong and not, instead of having put him on yours. And the whole idea is when he tries to be forceful, you say, sure, over here, go ahead. It's, bon appetit. So the yield is, in some respects, it's a fencing version of some of the martial arts, where you use a person's force against him by misdirecting it, so to speak, and but put him at a disadvantage, because the harder he tries, the more trouble he gets into. And so this is where fencing becomes a martial art, and if it's done well, people wonder why they keep testing their weapon. They want to know why it didn't hit, because if you're doing it just enough, they think they hit because they feel the resistance. What they don't realize is they didn't hit this. they hit this. And so then if they're testing their weapon and you know why they didn't hit, and they don't know why they didn't hit, you'll probably do it all day long and you'll still be hitting them. Because sometimes people just don't get it. And that's okay. I'm not out there to teach them how to solve it. I'm out there to give them a lot of experience with receiving it. And if you have a fencer who is well trained, they have a school of fencing or a coach's technique of teaching people to fence, and it's valid. By the time you've hit once and maybe a second time, they should know what you did, how you did it, and what they should do about it. That's about experience, and you don't run to the book and look it up. It has to already be here in the muscles, it has to be here in the head, in the perception, and in the psychology, that you ain't dying from this thing, don't get excited. Just do it. And people who can be strong and still relaxed are very hard to fence. If you're always very strong on the blade, that gets them one or two, and then if you're good at yielding and enveloping and binding and all that other stuff, and esquives, the stronger they do it, the more they get themselves in trouble. There's a level beyond which it's not productive to try to muscle people with an épée. So this is just to lay the groundwork for different ways we're going to be working on how to control the blade, how to make the opponent get in trouble. And sometimes you can control the blade with your own initiative. And if they fight, then you have them nailed. But if they just relax, sometimes they counter yield, and then that becomes a problem. Or if they relax enough, they can't remobilize the action that they need to stop you. Say, they relax, good, thank you. They don't want you to push on the blade so hard, so they go like this instead of like this. Okay, cool, I'm good with that. One thing that you know about in fencing, which is certainly different from things like diving or other sports where you get gymnastics, where you get scored more highly for executing something that is more difficult. You get points for degree of difficulty. Your score goes to a different scale because it's very obvious in diving, gymnastics. Those are form sports. They're not combat sports. And that's just as well, because the only combat sport I know that takes place in the pool is water polo. Yeah. And there's no fencing going on there. So the idea, I guess, is you try to get your opponent into trouble without getting yourself in trouble, and be the first one that gets out of trouble before your opponent comes up with something, a counter solution. So the action I described to you is circle 6 invitation, take the blade in 4, envelop in 4, get yielded into, counter yield, boom. If I wrestled with him, he had me. So I just changed the leverage position on the blade so that he was going, instead of into my weak, he was going into my strong and eventually into my guard. And by the time he realized it, this was already going to his chest. But it was maybe 2.5 to 3 seconds. But it was a series of boom, 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 boom advantages. And I had the last advantage, tee-hee. Thank you very much, sir. It was a good lesson. How did I learn that? I was training with one of the world's great fencing masters. And he was very creative. He didn't try to do the book. He knew the book. He was a protege of Italo Santelli, who was the Italian master who went to Hungary and became the paragon of coaching fencing and teaching fencing and creating champions in Hungary. And Maestro was his prévôt. He had a bit of a business training and bookkeeping and so on. The Depression hit, and he said, well, I got to do something for a buck, for a zloty. And he had been training as a fencer, and he became the assistant to Italo Santelli. And when he learned a great deal of post-classical Italian fencing, and it just more into the athletic style as opposed to the more formal style. Maestro was one of the great all kinds of athletes. When he was in the Romanian army, he'd been seen pole vaulting, and an officer said, "No, you're not doing that right. Let me show you how to do that." And this officer took him under his wing and taught him how to be a pole vaulter. He and Kovac were, who wrote the book Fencing and the Master, were the best of friends, and they were both excellent soccer players. They would play a full game of soccer, run across town, and get on the team and play another full game. That kind of guys. So when I had the opportunity to learn from such an extraordinary fencing coach, I didn't even know what I was talking about when I said I have a fencing coach. Was that he teaches you to put up fences? I mean, people didn't know what it was either. I didn't know what it was. But when my friend Johnny Schrecker said, he was a sophomore and he had just started the year before, he was on the team, he said, "You should go out for fencing." I said, "I don't know how to fence." And he said the magic words, "The maestro will teach you." I think I've told you, most people have heard the story about my first individual lesson. Some have not heard it. So, in order to be able to take the fencing class, I had to have passed the physical efficiency test the freshman hall had to take. It was a lot of upper body strength was very prominent in it, of which I had none. I could do the standing high jump because I had strong legs. I didn't go very high, but I went high enough to score. It was scored like a pentathlon point sheet. And perfect score was a 340. Passing was a 200, and I scored a 100. So I didn't pass. But because I had joined the band, and we had marching and drill practice a couple times a week, and the game and marching there, pre-game, halftime, after the game, and so on. The athletic department would waive you from the requirement of the gym during football season because you were doing all this exercise you were doing with the band. So I got out of the compulsory gym. And then my friend Johnny said, "You should try to take the fencing class. It's a good way to start. Maestro teaches the class, and you should get your basics there." But I had to get permission to take the class voluntarily because I hadn't qualified to take that class. This is where I talk about the confluence of fates. So I went to take the class, and Johnny said, "Did you get a lesson?" "What's a lesson?" He says, "Go to the practice room at this time and you'll see the fencers there, you'll see Maestro there. Ask him to give you a lesson." So I walked up, and when he wasn't doing anything, I said, "Maestro, may I have a lesson?" He said, "Sit." I had to sit and watch a whole bunch of lessons from the people that were more experienced while he went down the list of Al Matoski, who was the best épée fencer, one of the best in the country, and he was a sophomore. And he had learned from Maestro. This is good. And then he had some other fencers that were more experienced. He was giving lessons. I'm sitting and watching. And I'm trying to remember what I learned in the class about en garde and lunge and not much else. So finally he said, come, I give you a lesson. So I got up and he says, en garde. And I got him to what I thought was the en garde we had learned in the class. He looks at me, he says, lunge. And I did the lunge I thought that he had taught us to do in the class. He says, terrible. En garde, lunge. Very bad. Again, lunge. Miserable. He says, stop. He says, if you can't make a good straight lunge, it's a waste of time to give you lessons. And the lesson was over. So I heard him say if. If you can't make a good straight lunge. So I got hold of Johnny. We went down to the mirror at the end of the fencing room, and he said, this is what he wanted you to do. Not this. This. Get the weapon out first and then go follow the weapon. So I practiced in front of the mirror and practiced and practiced and practiced. And Johnny said, yes, that's what he wants. And then he went about and he got his lesson and he fenced and so on. Next day I went to practice and I said, Maestro, I can lunge now. May I have a lesson? Sit. Watch lessons. Okay. I wasn't seeing people do what I had been practicing because they had been in the game a little bit longer and they had more things they were doing. Finally, I was last, and he called, come, now you get lesson. He says, okay, you can lunge. Now I can give you lessons. And years later, I realized that's how he cut the squad. We say, if you quit, you should. If you refuse to quit, there's hope for you. And the way it went, this is going to not be about him anymore. It's going to be about me and my relationship with him. But people used to think that I had a bed that I kept in the fencing room. Yeah. Because when they came in, I had already been there. And when they left, I was still there and still working. And if there was a place for a bed, I probably would have had one. I had a room in the dorm, so I went back when I was over. The secret to getting good at this was, number one, do it correctly, and number two, do it a lot. And you get to what I call groove the movements. You teach your body how to do these things, the interrelationship of the actions, the sequences, and so on. And so this lots of reps, only correct. If you do incorrect, you dilute the soup. It's not how to learn. You don't want to do random. If you want to learn how to do something very well, do it as correctly as possible. Not stiff, not rigid, but as correctly as possible. You want to teach your body the feeling of it. And so I don't know how many lunges I did in the course of a season. There used to be a saying that said, to be a fencer, you must do 100 lunges every day. It didn't sound like that much. A lot of people thought that was a lot. But the coaches were telling people that. The top coaches were saying that. Give me a break, man. So, how many lunges do you think it takes before, lunge and recovery, before you have it so grooved that your body does that intuitively? You want to hit the guy, you go bam, boom, and you're back and he's hit. Well, I didn't know how to quite get to that level. But when Dick Dyer came back from the Olympic Games in '56 with movies of Christian Doriola fencing, he was the greatest foil fencer of all time to this day. And he's fencing with the Italians, and he's en garde here. And he starts the lunge here, he finishes below the weapon down here, bounces his hip and recovers in one tempo. It's boom! Whoa! I want to learn how to do that. Well, I never was with a Doriola, nobody else ever was either. but I used to make a game out of being able to get out of my lunge before they could reach out and hit me. Boom, boom, because it was the way to do it that worked for me. My legs learned how to do that. My feet learned how to do that. And it was intuitive. People would want to take a parry and a riposte, and I wouldn't be there. Works in 402, by the way. You go all the way out there, boom, and on the way, the riposte is right about here. He said, "Thank you very much." Count the not even get excited. It's just it's there. In epee, I used to use a replacement. Meister taught us to, when you recover, you hit him up. You hit him when you're going, and you hit him when he's coming. He didn't phrase it that way, but that's what it was all about. You defend with your point, and he taught me how to make oppositions eventually. So I finished the lunge, recover into en garde, and then reach like this. And I developed this ability to do this with my shoulder. I got that from my parents, the ability to do that. but it also stretching and stretching and stretching and longer. And it was amazing how many guys who were 6'5" that I could outreach because they were taught by a coach who told them that this is your extension. They weren't taught to put everything else into the extension as well. So I get this guy who's 6'5", and he was a nationally ranked fencer, and he would reach for me, and I would go, and he said, "Man, you're assy long." I said, "Yeah." People didn't understand, and not everybody to this day does that. But if you can do that without losing your balance, losing your control, the resilience, so you can do that and then do something else right away, which is the key. If you just hang it out there, it's not going to work forever, very briefly. But not very many people teach that. But to me, that was a basic movement. It was a counterattack, it was a remise, it was the lunge, it was the flesh. You fight in the other guy's country. A good army always fights in the other guy's country. So when you're learning to coach, you don't want to harp on it so much, but give people a task list of how many reps and rest, and then do so many repetitions again and relax. You don't want people to practice to the point where they cannot control the action and do it erroneously. If they can do 10 good ones and the 11th one's not so good anymore, stop at 10. Don't confuse your body. Don't confuse your brain. Okay? The idea is to embed the correct. And so do only correct. You can do variations on correct, but then it's a slightly different thing, and you can perfect that as well. One of the actions that is great in epee is do an advanced lunge flush from the lunge. Now, you have to have the right time, the right range, the focal point, and so on, the transition. It's pretty complex. It seems like you just stick it out there and keep going, which, in a primitive sense, it's true. But the shifting of gears and so on, that has to be natural. When I teach people the flesh, and this is, we're going to be doing this, I teach them to walk. Just walk. Just plain walk. These people who crouch and spring, that's nice, but frankly, that's something else. What's the lesson in that? There's a lesson for today's material. You want to get the opponent to chase your blade, but even if he contacts it, not control it. If you're this, and he finds it and takes control of it, by the time you undo this, the light's been on for a while, and it wasn't yours. So this is not a way to fence. I've known some good fencers who were stiff, but they weren't good because they were stiff. The ability to be strong, if your muscles are strong and your hand is strong and your strength is relaxed but not stiff, big difference. You still perceive what's going on out there, even though you're strong, as long as you haven't crunched down and made the muscles stiff so they don't perceive anything but themselves. If the muscles only feel the muscle tension, they won't feel anything else. So it's very important that when you do an action strongly, you do it without stiffness. You have to be very strong and still be able to do this. My fist is closed very tight right now. Doesn't make my arm stop moving. If my arm is tight and I can still do this, but having anything really stiff and tight is a negative, because it limits you very much, and it keeps you from being quick and timely, and you also don't perceive. If there's tension here and there's tension here, you cannot feel this. It doesn't get past that blockage of tension to get up to these points, centers of awareness. You don't feel your weapon if your arm is tight. You want strength so you can exert the force without tension. You do not want to lock up muscles. You don't want to lock up a joint, because there's very little good in that and a lot of bad. You give away time, you give away control, and you give away the initiative of the next action by tension. So why do we do strength training in fencing? Well, I just gave it to you. Tell me. You want to be able to be strong without tension. You want to be able to exert a force and unexert it instantly if necessary. If you do a long jump, you run as fast as you can, you hit the board, and you contract the muscles, and the next thing you do, they extend vigorously through your center of gravity so your body flies through the air like Superman for that long. If the legs were very powerful and strong and couldn't change from that right away, you'd run in there, you'd hit the board, and you'd bounce off the board into the sand. You have to be able to do vroom, vroom. If you're in a striking sport, combat sport, if you make a block, bing, and what do you think's going to happen next? That's like, thank you, sir, may I have another? But in martial arts, as in fencing, there is the parry and the riposte. There is the bind and the touch. You tie up the guy's arm, or you put him aside, and while he's going that way, you're going over here. Yeah, Dane knows how to do that stuff better than I'll ever know. But the shoe is on the other foot in the fencing, but on the martial arts, that's Dane. Yeah. But you parry riposte, you do evade, you do remise. In hand fighting of all various types, of which he is a master. So the idea then is you have to be able to train yourself to be very strong, but have the ability to relax immediately. Not limp, but you let go. Any tension you may have has to disappear immediately. And so this is when you find the opponent's blade and you control it. While I'm controlling it here, I'm manipulating my weapon to maintain that control. We'll review this stuff. If I need to do this, I can't have my arm tight. If I need to do this, this could be tight and I can go like this, but then I can't do the fencing action that comes next, which probably should be a riposte or something of that nature. So you have to be strong without tension. You can have impulses of high power, like when you make a hard beat. You don't swing a bat, you snap. You pull with the fingers and you snap the forearm, and how long does that take? That's how long it takes. So you make a pressure invitation, the blade goes over here and you go, right? If you can't do that, you were too tight. So we're talking about coaching. If you teach people how to do that so that they do it productively, and not just because you said hit the blade so they go grrr. Anytime you see somebody do something wrong and they get a touch, they should not get another touch from you on the same action, ever. He did that, I can do this. If he does that again, it'll be my touch. But that you have to have the background as a fencer and as the coach to recognize the changes that are necessary on the fly. Now, sometimes it's not that easy, and I cannot tell you how much time I've spent lying on my back in a bed and practicing mentally. How do I make not moving anything, but nerve patterning. The day before an important competition, this is back in the 60s when I was competing at a pretty good level. I know I'm going to have to fence this guy and this guy and this guy tomorrow. So I visualized the bout that night, almost in my dreams. How does he fence? What does he do? I've seen him fence, so I know I have a non-film film of his fencing. If he does this action and does it at this timing, and there's the tempo. So if I get him in the bout, I've already scouted him in my sleep. And the next day, if he comes out and does the same action the way I expect it, the answer is immediate, because I've already practiced it. Here. That's a skill that doesn't come easily. And I kind of fell into it and decided it worked for me. The idea of knowing ahead of time and predisposing the actions so that they are done correctly, in the right time, in the right place, in relation to the opponent. If you have somebody who wants to do a pressure and then a circle take of the blade, and so you have to be able to go boom, and you don't have to do it 3 times to know that's what he's doing. Everybody you've ever fenced is fencing in your brain, embedded, it's there. Being able to recall it and use the information, that's the art. When I talk to you about people I fenced in 1959, I remember the bouts, I remember the touches. If I had to fence him again today, he might try to do the same stuff, and I would have, as long as I could hit him again, I'd do the same thing I did back then. You have to have the skill of seeing him, seeing the opponent when he's not there. What does he do? How does he react? If you've seen him fence, or if you fenced against him, you should know. One of the gibberish words of modern sports science is visualization. I didn't use that word till just now because I was just describing it and what the use of it is. You visualize by creating the opponent in your mind. You know what the opponent does because you've seen it happen. You know what the opponent wants to do. You know what the opponent will do if you do this because you have seen this fencer. Maybe you fenced that fencer or you have watched and scouted that fencer. But in any case, it's put in your head and it's there. Being able to recall it, that's a bit of an art form, but it's not that hard to do. You relax and you just create him and fence him. Just sitting there, we're lying in bed. You fence him. So you get up the next day, you warm up for the competition, you go out and you see this fencer that you now fence because you scouted him. And you say, well, if I do this, he'll do that and I'll hit him. So you do that, he does that, and you hit him. You don't have to do 3 repetitions forward to see what he's doing today. You can predict with a high degree of accuracy what his intuitive motions will be. And if you surprise him, he will do what he does intuitively. And if you know what that is, the touch is yours right now. Or it could be at any rate. Now, don't show it to him 3 times and then try to do it, because then he'll have control of it. It won't be intuitive. You don't want to say, I'm going to go. No, he's going to try to disengage that. And you try to disengage, it goes boom, because you told him what you're going to do. What you really want to do is tell him what you're going to do and be lying. And don't give him a chance to understand the truth. It's a personal development thing that the best fencers do without necessarily talking about it. They watch somebody fence, And they say, okay, I know what he's doing. I know what I'm going to do about it. And when he does that, here's what I'll do, and I'll be fine. That can be a trap. Always there are anecdotes. If you've been in the game long enough, you got stories. So I was fencing at the Olympic Games. I was at a pool that involved Grigory Kris, who's from the Soviet team, Kaus, I mentioned before, who was from the Hungarian team. There was a few other fencers in there. And I was fencing a nice classic game up here, and I was doing well. And Grigory Kris had never seen me. I had seen him fence Bill Hoskins for the gold medal at one time and beat Bill Hoskins. So I had an idea about what he was going to do. He was a bit of a brawler. It was all on purpose. I was fencing somebody over here, and he stood over there, and he was watching. He's scouting me. And after a while, he goes and walks away and sits down. Notice that dismissive gesture? He shouldn't have done that. I'm glad he did. All of a sudden, he's holding his French grip back by the pommel with an angle here. And he saw me fencing this way. And I got on guard this way. I was holding it like a saber. And I was going to be doing hooks. So he gives an invitation. It was lefty. And I went into the invitation, and he goes over to take the blade down like this, and I just went whoop up in the chest. So we did it again. And he went for it again. He went whoop. So then what he did then, he says, I know I saw him doing this, so here, I'll try it one more time. So he tries it one more time, and instead of he goes around twice. So I go up to here, and I go double, hit him again. Intuitively, I didn't say I'm going to do a double. He's going like this, I'm going like this. Now he's got that three. Okay, so he started to find my timing. He realized that he had trapped himself, and now he had a problem because I had three touches. So he decided he's going to do invitations and takes and not just do blah, blah. So he started to fence with me, and he did false takes and then a real take, and I said, he's got my timing. If I keep doing that, I'm hit. He's got my timing. I have to change something. So I went back like this, and I put my blade out and took it back, put the blade out and put it back, and he was trying to get me to put my blade out there seriously. So he's given the bigger and bigger invitations. So one time I said, well, I've got 4 touches. I have to restart my sequence because he's onto this now. He's got my distance. He's got my timing. So I just resisted doing anything. He was inviting me to go hit him, and I was doing nothing except just moving. So finally he made an even bigger invitation. I said, if I throw it at his hand, it'll keep him from doing something. So he's going like this, and I went, and the light went on. Thank you. But the one time I had made a flick to the hand, and I just wanted to throw something there to make him take his hand back and not finish. By the time he took his hand back, the light had been on for a while. It's just very strange. He saw me, and I saw him see me. And he made the mistake of telling me that he saw me, because I had to figure out now, what's he going to do? And he did. And I said, I just want to keep him away. Boop, aha! The next day was pool system, so he advanced as well. And he got to the gold medal match, and he won the Olympic gold medal the following day. Sometimes these bouts just stay in your mind. If he were here today, I'd be doing the same thing, and so would he. Because I would defy him to do anything else. more importantly, don't just do something different. Maintain dominance. Be the one who leads the other by the nose. It's very important. I'm going to tell him what he's allowed to do, and I'm going to tell him he's not allowed to do, because that I want him to work for me, not for him. You have to be sure, as a competitor, that you are dictating the bout. Now, it doesn't have to be blatant. It can be, sometimes it can be done seemingly passively. Truly passively loses big time. But appearing to be passive, yes, come and get me. I'm really no good at this stick. Yeah. Oh, you got me scared, man. Oh, stick. If you can get people to get so cocky they don't give you any credit, oh, wonderful. I'm really so. Am I holding this right, dummy? Now, you can't be rude, but you can be in charge of the bout. One of the important characteristics of good fencers is they dominate the opponent. Dominance is very important. Number one, it's better for you. Number two, it's bad for him. To feel that you're being dominated gets either desperation that may work once, or desperation that won't ever work again, or tension which slows down or messes up his technique. If you feel that you are being led by the nose, it's a very lousy feeling when you're trying to fence and you know you're not in charge. Terrible. Conversely, if you know you are in charge, life is good. And now, of course, you must have done enough practice and training and so on that now that life is good, you have something to do that'll work. That's the repertoire aspect of it. You have to make things work into the repertoire you know how to use. Not just do, but use. So you dominate the person, so you create the touch, and the person has no ability to stop you for a moment, and a moment is plenty. How to fence, but how to teach fencing is what you have to be able to impart to the fencers. When you have taught a certain amount of repertoire, you don't want to teach everything at once. You teach a short set of this and that, and if not this, then that, and maybe you can do that mirror image of the same thing. That's enough complication to fence national championships. But you have to be in so total control. So when you teach a beginner, you teach them how to do something, how to prepare the action, how to continue from the action, and then a little bit later, what to do if the opponent has a solution. So they have to have counter solution, but that's a much different level from just starting somebody. It's necessary, but don't do it all at once, because they'll go scramble brains and it won't work. You don't want them to wonder if they should be doing what they're doing. They should have no question about they're doing the right thing at the right time, and if the opponent solves it, they learn how, after a while, how to counter solve it, but don't overload. They should have confidence in a set of things that they know how to do, that do well, but comfortably, and so on. And when you teach corrections, you want to say a lot of yes if you can. Don't flatter errors. Say, no, that's not correct. This is what you should do instead. You never correct the fencer's technique if the first thing you say is, no, you're wrong. That doesn't tell them, there's nothing constructive about that. That creates a negative. Just like you never persuade a person to change their mind about something when the first thing that you say to them is you're wrong. You say, I see it a little bit differently, or this can be done differently, or in the case of fencing, do it this way instead. It's not that you were wrong. I don't say the word wrong. I said, try it this way. And I've had, I don't know if any of you are going to know the name Joel Fish, but he's a very well-recognized sports psychologist who works with professional teams, Penn teams, and I used to have conversations with him. And we talked about that in particular. He said, yeah, we want them to have a direction in which to go. You don't want them to, this is his interpretation of what I was doing. You don't want them to not do things, you want them to do things. So you emphasize what to do, how to do it like this. And as I said, look for chances to say that was good. Yes, that's what I wanted you to do. Yes, that's the way. Yes, yes, yeah. No, not quite. Don't just say no. No. It can be done a little better. Let's try it like this. So that people are confident and comfortable and receptive. Now, there are some people you have to hit over the head with a 2x4 to get their attention. It's the old donkey joke. But if it takes that more than once or twice, they may not be a talent for fencing. Now, you don't want to fall into a conclusion too early, because some people who can't do anything learn how to do things. Right? But the idea is positive reinforcement. Any time you have a chance to say, that was better, let's do it again, embed it. Embed the confidence to do it that way. And it may not be the way they'll be doing it in 5 years, but they should be, when they go to do an action, they should feel good that it's correct. If you teach a foil fencer when to put the blade out, where to put the blade, to induce a reaction, and to make a disengage and finish. That sounds very simple to say. But you are asking this person to create an action they can use to their advantage in somebody else's head. So that's an art form. So they have to be confident that if they do it well, it will work. And then when it works, it's reinforced. So the same thing in teaching, whether it's in drills or it's in lessons, if they get it right and it works and you reinforce the correct ones, all of a sudden you have placed it in there, they filed that away, and they will trust it when they need to use it. And maybe that'll just be one thing you do and then a variation on it. You know, you do this way this time, they do this way this time, but they relate it. You say, yes, that's similar action, it's just the other side. Especially with youngsters, they have to, you don't want to get hyper technical in the gibberish. You want to say, put the point over here and pretend you're going to hit me with it. They know about pretend. They don't know about feint disengage. They'll know it later. What I say to more experienced people is fencing is the art of telling lies. You don't want to tell that to a kid. You do an action that you show them so they will do what you expect them to do. And when they do, you know what you're going to do next because you have just done it and you do it well. You did it correctly, you did it nicely. That's ready to be used. Use it. Not all 20,000 fencing you could do, short list, but related stuff. So when you're teaching beginners at any level, but certainly with kids, you want them to be confident that what they have learned is correct, and it may not work against everybody, but it will work against some. And then when they say to you, well, I did what you taught me and it didn't work, what did he do? You should know. Well, I went like this and he went like this. So, well, then you just have to find a way to get past that. Let's work on that in today's lesson. That's low pressure. But when they're more mature and they're more combative, they can start to be a little bit aggressive as the coach, not as conciliatory. But you want them confident at the beginning. You want them to get a whole lot of yes. I'm getting this. I understand what I'm supposed to be doing. I know I'm not the national champion yet, but I'm having a good time. I like being taught, and I like to learn it. And little by little, you tighten the screws and you expand on it, and you make the execution at a higher standard. Little by little, they don't lose confidence if you build them. And if the opponent solves it, they say, well, your opponent solved it. That's to your opponent's credit. Now you have to figure out how to either do something else entirely or learn how to solve his solution. That's people who have taught youngsters, and most of you have, that the idea is you build the fencer. You don't throw them up against the wall and hope they stick. You build on top of what they can do, and then little by little they can do more, and they're confident in it. And when they get up against an opponent who chases the blade the way you've been doing it in the lesson, they say, I know what to do about that. Boom! And so then you go, boom. Hey, the greatest experience I had in another era, I had a group at a summer camp, and a bunch of people from Long Island that had come in for the camp. And this one fellow, I was trying to teach him how to do a circle 6 opposition thrust lunge, or a circle 6 opposition counterattack. And so I spent a lot of time at this one session working on just that circle 6 opposition and go this way, go that way. So I saw him at another tournament, a high school level tournament, and in his inimitable Long Island accent, hey, Mr. Mechanic, he says, you know that stuff you taught me about going like this? I said, yeah. He says, it works. I said, how you doing to me? He says, I won all my bouts. I said, I'm so thrilled to know that it works. I didn't teach you garbage. I didn't say that, but I'm so happy you were able to use it and make it work. That's great. And one of many ways, this is how coaches get paid.